and imagining the Anthropocene. I'm super happy to present after Sam because he gave a lot of food for thought on how to reimagine actual images that are well known. So I hope this presentation will speak to his. So the Anthropocene is a topic I think in this type of conference of environmental humanities doesn't really need an explanation, but for me it's more important to portray how it is represented in popular media. For instance, this is definition at National Geographic, and it's basically defined as an official unit of geological time used to describe the most recent period in Earth history where human activity started to have a significant impact on the planet's climate and ecosystems. And this definition is very important because what I want to do with my work is to challenge it and to use photographies to so. So I have two research questions. The first one is, how are those people who attempt to visualize the condition of people, places, and space addressing the Anthropocene? And how can in the Anthropocene era the visual impact of photography be used not to represent reality, but to negotiate with actuality? And well, as I said, my aim is to use the example of photographic projects to question what the Anthropocene is and imagine what it could be. So this is the structure. I'm going to start by representing, then inquiring, and then imagining. And if I have time, I want to introduce you to an experiment I did based on this inquiry. So first, the issue of representation. And I want to engage here with the project called the Anthropocene Project by Edward Burtynsky. Burtynsky is a Canadian photographer, and he's considered the most accomplished contemporary photographer, and he's like the environmental photographer. And basically, he uses massive technologies and image making to depicts industrial landscapes. And well, he's been very prolific. And his latest project is called the Anthropocene Project and includes images like this one. And if you're familiar with his work, this image is not at all different from anything he's done before. So this is called lithium mines, and he uses, it's an aerial photography on how lithium is produced in the Atacama Desert in Chile. The image is quite striking, and you could see the Andes, and you could see those pools where colors that don't seem natural. And what he always wants to show is how we humans destroy the planet, and he intends to do so with this idea of sublimity. And it's very interesting because he gets inspiration from the first environmental photographers that use the sublime, but he uses what some critics have called the industrial sublime. And this is, for instance, a quote that he writes about his own work, and he says that these images, like the one I presented before, are metaphors of the dilemma of our modern existence, the search for a dialogue between attraction and repulsion, seduction and fear. So for me, that is, for instance, this idea of the industrial sublime. And what I want to engage here is, why is this project so problematic? And as I said, I want to engage on how the, especially anthropologists, are criticizing the idea of the Anthropocene. So critiques such as Anna Singh, Donna Haraway, and others are talking about how to name the Anthropocene in a different way that addresses what the Anthropocene really is. For instance, his colonial and capitalist roots. So one of the first names that appeared, and now there are many, is the Capitalocene project. So here I ask myself if Burtynsky would have called his project the Capitalocene project, or like, what if Haraway and Malm, who was the person who came out with this name, were taken seriously. And of course, he wouldn't, because part of Burtynsky's work is his compliance with capital, and he uses not only, he engages with the enterprises to enter the sites, but also he is inserted in the system, and that is very problematic because he is just using the name of the Anthropocene to name his project when he doesn't really engage with the Anthropocene really is. So, well, I say here why it's so problematic, and it's basically because it's politically ambiguous. He separates himself from any political significance, and that is dangerous because being such a well-known and respected environmental photographer, people he's generating a confusion around this issue of the Anthropocene, whose popularity is based on the strength of that storytelling and of unifying humans as the ones that are provoking this destruction of the planet, when it's actually not all humans but a system that is capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism. So what I wanted to do is, well, if asking myself if we are failing at representing the Anthropocene as Burtynsky is, how about inquiring the Anthropocene? So here I want to engage with photography as a methodology and see what can come out of this. So I was looking for projects that could really depict what the Anthropocene is, even if they don't address the Anthropocene. And I came up with this project that I really, really love, and it's by two Finn photographers called Rita Kovalainen and Seppo, and they use oral history and photography to investigate the mythology associated with the forest and people relationship with local woodlands in Finland. And after this process, they provide a comprehensive picture of the traditional beliefs of their ancestors concerning trees. For instance, this is a photograph that I really love. This is a lady called Milma, and she is standing next to a tree that is called Carsico, because those trees have meaning for them. Those things that you see in the bark actually mean are related to the relationship with their ancestors and the people who is buried there. And at the same time, you can see all the log trees, so you can see how they're still in danger, and there's this recognition that trees are important for them, but they're not free from the capital. So I think this is very important, and you can see the difference, not only because there's a more like an intimate photograph, but because you can see it was taken seriously, the relationship with people and the planet. And in this sense, photography becomes a tool for colonial work and allows us to confront Western civilization. For instance, after this exercise, photographers managed to understand how they said, for this quote I really like, it said that the priest's most important tool was the axe, and how there's also resistance on how those trees are still standing. And and I think it is amazing, and how the approach can be so different. But then I ask, and this is very in line on how a series of anthropologists and geographers and other scholars are engaging with the Anthropocene. So I was very interested in this work called Manifesto to Live in the Anthropocene, and think, okay, now there is people engaging with ideas on how to live in the Anthropocene. Like, we cannot get out of it, so let's embrace it, and let's like build some different relationality with it. So I ask myself if photography could be a speculative practice, and this is why I just loved the previous presentation, because it is using the visual as a speculative practice, putting so many layers together. So this is an issue, like in the context of art and ecology, photography is usually seen as a tool for witnessing the changes to our planet, and not really to propose a vision for the future. But at the same time, there is this urgency to take violations seriously and propose impossible worlds. So how to reconcile that? And here I came up with this project called Petrochemical America by Richard Misrach and Kate Orff. Richard Misrach is a really well-known photographer, and Kate Orff is an architect. And in the 90s, if I'm not wrong, or maybe 80s, Misrach went to Louisiana to work on, and he came up with a work on the Cancer Alley, which is a place in Louisiana along the river that is well known because a lot of people have died there of cancer because of the heavy industry that was installed there. The photographer himself, he got sick after doing that work, and in the 2000s he came back and revisited the place and took new photographies. And what he did is not only to present the book, but also to engage with this photographer, and they came up with a set of intervened images where they don't not only show what it is, but also what it was and what it could be. So this is an example. uh, this is called Requiem for Baju. So this is a photograph that he took, and then by the use of the through lines, Orff showed that it wasn't a dead landscape always, that it was at some time there was life there, but also that life can come back there. And I think this is really, really powerful. So I ask if a more environmentally sensitive future can be photographed. And this is a question I still have, because I don't think we can photograph the future. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about that, and probably the response is no, but it can be imagined. So, for instance, these are some quotes about Orff and Misrach's work. And he says, for instance, this work is more than a melancholic mourning for what was in the past. It helped us to imagine a more environmental sensitive future that recognizes both actants and networks of action in the landscape. And in my opinion, it shows how speculation can act as a catalyst for a collectively redefining of our relationship to reality by proposing visual what if scenarios. And I think, for instance, the techniques used and presented in the past presentation are amazing for that. So I have three main conclusions. And not all photographic representation about environmental problems are wrong, but the misrepresentations, as Burtynsky's, can be problematic. His work shows the risks of representing environmental issues. And there are other alternatives. For example, Kovalainen and Seppo, they provide an example of photography as a mode of inquiry and decolonial practice. And Petrochemical America shows that photography could contribute to represent and inquire about environmental issues. And in line of the work of several anthropologists and cultural geographers, imagine alternative futures. And I hope I still have time. Based on this work of research that I did, I wanted to propose an experiment, because I am from Costa Rica, and I was using examples that are in a way from very different places, and I wanted to see how I can use that in my own environment. So I came up with this little project, and I'm just going to present a tiny bit of it. I call it coexistimos, which means we coexist, and it's a multimodal inquiry into insects as urban companion species. And I just had this very broad question: what can a photo walk reveal about human and morpho butterfly entanglements in the urban space? And the inspiration for this was one day I was coming back from the farmers market in San Jose, which is Costa Rica's capital city. And I don't know if you heard about Costa Rica. It's very well known in the world because of its biodiversity, but actually the city is not a very biodiverse place. It's actually a really hard place to live. So every time I see a morpho butterfly in the forest, I usually feel um, relieved. But when I encountered one in the city, I felt unsettled. And what I did was to explore this unsettledness. Sorry about the noise. To explore this unsettledness using photography. So this is just 3 photos, and I wanted to show you like the exclosure of biodiversity from the city. So there are biological reserves in the city, but they're closed. We are not even allowed to enter. This is a reserve I've never been to, and I walked past it my whole life. And I started to think probably this butterfly that I encountered came from this type of place. So this is what I wanted to show. And then walking in the city, I came up with these postcards. They are sold in the gift shops, and you can see there's a morpho butterfly there, and there's this image that to see a morpho butterfly, you need all sorts of special gear. And it's not something that you encounter in your everyday life. You need to be prepared, and you need like objects to mediate that encounter. And finally, this is a photo I took at a butterfly garden. I felt like even if there's this separation in San Jose between nature and culture, when you encounter nature, you still feel the sensorial extravaganza of this encounter. So it's interesting because while the separation is problematic, when you really get to be in those type of places, in a way you forget that separation. And so I came up with this exercise that I name insect jamming. So based on the activist activity called culture jamming, which is the practice of parodying advertisements and hijacking billboards in order to drastically alter their messages. I wanted to see how I could alter these photographs to show the radical interdependence or everything that exists, and like challenge that separation that I encounter in my photo work exercise. So I came up with this intervention based on Petrochemical American kind of way of working. And what I did is like I started to interconnect the different actants in the postcard and show like, and in a way also cancel the gear. And this is just a small exercise that I did to kind of approach this to my environment and show like things could be different, and the power of the visual, but also the power of creation and handwork to change these meanings and challenge this separation. Thank you.